There's a really special approach to improvising that gets unlocked once you understand how to pay attention and highlight the chords that you're hearing in a moving chord progression. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to highlight a major or a minor chord using just 4 notes. Oh, and be sure to stick around till the very end of the lesson because I've got a free gift for you and your guitar that you're both going to love. All right, so let's dive right into it. So essentially what I was doing in the beginning of this video was playing over an A minor blues chord progression. Similar, kind of in the vein of like Thrill Is Gone, something you'd hear like a minor blues chord progression. And I was essentially highlighting the chords of each chord in that progression. And I was really focusing on those particular notes, highlighting the chords, but peppering in a few little pentatonic licks here and there. So I'm going to give you a play-by-play of what I did using these 4-note groupings and why they work and how you can start using them yourself. But the best part is it's not just limited to minor blues, not even stylistically. It's something that you can use over any chord progression that uses major and minor chords. So the chord progression I was working with in that backing track is A minor. We can call that our 1 minor chord, right? Since this is a minor blues, we'll just stick with the minor chord being the 1. Typically you would default to the relative major as the 1, but in this case we can do that. That's our 1 minor, and then we have our 4 minor, D minor, and then there's an F, which would be a sharp 5, and then we have our 5, and E7, which for all intents and purposes we can treat that like a major chord because the 4-note group that we're gonna be using to target each of these chords, we don't have to worry so much about that flat 7 because we're not even going to be highlighting it, with these 4-note groups. So we can essentially use the 4-note group to highlight a major chord over this dominant 5 chord here, right? So that's the chord progression, right? That's what we're working with. So we have 4 chords here, okay? The first 2 are minor, right? So if we were to look at our A minor chord, right? This 4-note group that we're going to be using to highlight the notes within the chord are this. We're going to start with 5th fret on the low E string here, and then 8th fret, and then 7th fret on the A string, and then 7th fret on the D string. Those are our 4 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're very specifically targeting, very special notes in this 4-note group. What we're targeting is our root, right? So if we're playing it over an A minor, an A note would naturally be the root, right? Then we have our minor 3rd, which is that 8th fret note here, which is a C. And then we have our 5th, 7th fret on the A string. That right there is an E note. And then we have our octave. So it's an A note just like this, just an octave up. So it gives us some extra tonality to play with, because sometimes you don't want to only have just one root note to land on. Sometimes it helps to resolve a line, let's say, by going up to a higher octave, So that's the cool thing about octaves is that you can get a different flavor of even just the same note just by virtue of what octave it's in. So this is our 4-note group, right? And you may think, oh, this sounds like an arpeggio, because it is, but we're just limiting it to just these 4 basic notes because this is going to be essentially a movable kind of shape to fit over other minor chords. And what's great is it's right here in the neighborhood of the A minor pentatonic scale, right? It's essentially just targeting notes in an A minor chord or arpeggiating, right? But they're all within that scale pattern, right? So that makes it helpful. We're just focusing on those notes because this is meant to get you introduced to the concept of targeting targeting notes within a chord. We're going to be targeting notes within a chord, also known as chord tones, right? And think of it this way. If you're playing, if let's say there's an A minor chord playing, and you're playing the notes in the A minor chord over it, naturally, it's going to work, right? Like mathematically, it's going to work. So that just makes it essentially a safety net to introduce you to the concept of highlighting chord tones when you're just focusing on playing the notes within the very chord that you're playing over. So that's our 4-note group for the A minor chord, right? And remember, it's root, minor 3rd, 5th, octave. Those are the 4 notes, and this is going to reflect with when we play it over different chords. So moving on to the D minor chord, which is our 4 minor, we're going to be doing the same exact thing with this chord. So the 4-note group is here. 5th fret on the A string, 8th fret on the A string, 7th fret on D and G. 1, 2, 3, 4. We just took this same shape over the A minor chord and now just shifted it down a string to highlight the D minor chord, right? So it's right there. So we already have half the chord progression figured out. So we know that if we play the proper chord tones to reflect the specific chord, that the notes are going to add up and they're going to work, right? But it's very important that you're highlighting the chord tones with the corresponding chord. So here's the trick when it comes to playing over chord changes. It's not like you can just play a one-size-fits-all scale and then just wail on that the entire time. Now you could do that and you could get away with it and you could actually have some inspiring times doing something like that. But if you feel limited by just sticking to one scale, like the minor pentatonic scale, let's say, and you want to expand your horizons even further, it's going to require what's called active listening, which means that when you hear a chord progression going on and you want to play over the changes, you want to highlight the changes, you have to be listening to which chord you're playing over, because you don't want to get caught playing, highlighting the notes of a wrong chord, because you run the risk of sounding pretty dissonant and bad. So consider that the first major trade-off with playing over chord changes is you have to really pay attention to make sure that you are truly playing over the chord changes, not just kind of playing and hoping that it lands. Oh, and hey, by the way, if you're getting value out of this lesson, please hit that like button and consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. It'll really help us out, and it'll let us know that you want to see more lessons just like this one, which we'd be more than happy to give you. So thanks in advance, and let's get back to business. So now at the second half of the progression, we have that F chord, right? F major and then E7. But we're going to treat them the exact same when it comes to this 4-note group, right? So the 4-note group that we're going to be using to highlight the F chord is going to be a 4-note group that highlights a major chord, right? So as opposed to what we've been doing up until now, highlighting minor chords, now we're going to highlight a major chord. And the difference only lies in one note, the third. So if we're looking at F, right? F, obviously, if we're looking at an F chord, F is the root note. Duh, right? What happens next, we want to play our third, right? But since we're not playing a minor chord, we're playing a major chord. I'm already giving it away, which means that our third needs to be major. So we're not playing a minor third over a major chord with a major third in it. We're playing a major third if we want to properly highlight that, that chord. So you know how the minor third is like, you got to stretch with your pinky to bring it out here? We're actually going to play it right here, the major third, because otherwise you have to stretch it even further to keep it on the same string. So we're going to be playing right here, the 7th fret on the D string. That's our third. So we have root, third, and then with our pinky, we're going to reach over to the 10th fret of the D string. That's our 5th, and then we have the 10th fret on the G string as our octave. So an F, root, major third, 5th, octave. What does that sound like? There you go, right? Star Spangled Banner. That is like literally like the first few notes of that is just highlighting an arpeggio, And now you know, right? Now you know musically what's actually going on with that. So that's why it has that kind of, patriotic sound. That major tonality is just great, right? So we're essentially doing that. We're essentially highlighting the notes in that F chord, right? Now in this F chord here, we have a root, a 5th, an octave, and then the third's actually up here, the upper third. So we're just playing that same note an octave lower to have this nice convenient 4-note grouping. And then when the chord progression changes to that E7 chord, we're going to do the same exact shape here, but just shift it down a fret. So we're going now down to the 7th fret of the A string is our root note. That's an E, which is the root note of the E7 chord, right? Root, major third. So that's 6th fret on the D string, and then 9th fret on the D string, and then 9th fret on G. That's another 4-note group. 1, 2, 3, 4. Root, major third, 5th, octave. And if you're wondering, why is it only the third that changes between major and minor? So with major and minor chords, the root notes stay the same, the 5th stay the same. The 5th is what's known as a perfect interval, along with the 4th. Generally, most of the time, those stay the same between major and minor tonalities. But the biggest difference lies in the third. So that's why with a minor chord, you're hearing that minor third It gives it that minor sound. Now what if I were to change the same exact thing to A major instead of A minor? Sounds totally different than this. So remember how I said how this is like a movable kind of shape? Which, I mean, you already saw, right, how we were able to move when we played over the A minor chord. And then to play it over the D minor chord, we just moved it down a string. And like when we're doing the major shape here, the major 4-note group over the F, and we can move it down 1 fret to play it over E. That's how it's movable. So it's essentially, you're learning like 2 finger patterns, actual physical finger patterns, but for the price of 4 chords, because you have 2 minor chords and 2 major chords. And so with this, all you have to do is just move the shape. So like, for example, if you're playing it over any other kind of chord progression, right, that's outside of this particular context, you just want to make sure that if you're knowing, you got to know what's a major and what's a minor chord in the given progression, and then find the root note, start there. Either I would recommend find the root note starting on the low E string or the A string, especially since this is meant to be an introduction into this concept. So it's the most helpful, the easiest really, to find the root note starting on those 2 strings. Then you can fulfill that same finger pattern, knowing whether or not it's a minor or a major chord. So like, for example, let's say I wanted to do over a chord progression like this. Like let's say C and A minor, and then F and G. Just like a typical kind of, or 1, 6, 4, 5 kind of thing, right? So we have C as our one chord, right? And it's a major chord, right? That's a C chord. So we're going to be playing the major 4-note group, right? So in this case, we're doing root note, major 3rd, 5th, octave. And I'm just doing this to demonstrate, right? We don't have to dive into this chord progression specifically. I want to get back to the minor blues thing since we have a great track for that. But just to show you, right? So we have our 1 chord figured out, and then A minor is our next chord. We already know it, way up here. And then let's say we have F, right, as our 4 chord. So we can do, actually, we already know that, right? If we were to do it up here, and then we have a G, a 5 chord. Now, just for the sake of ease, I'm going to go ahead and adapt the F and the A minor to this position here. So it's all kind of in the same neighborhood, right? So if we were to play the 1 chord and then play the A minor chord, right? The 6 minor, same as this, right? And then we have F. Right, and then G. I can essentially now just play those 4-note groups to reflect each chord, and you will hear the chord progression without me actually having to play the full chords. Check it out. Right, there you go. That's just to demonstrate how highlighting the chord tones, it's a perfect substitution for actually playing the chords. It's essentially the same thing, you're just playing them in a different way. And I was kind of doing that sort of 50s style doo-wop ballad thing where I was arpeggiating it, in kind of a waltzy sort of feel. And you got that, and it totally worked. So that was just to show you how you can adapt this 4-note shape, right, to reflect whatever other kind of chord. But going back to the A minor blues thing, right? We have those 4 chords understood now, right? We got our A minor, we got our 4-note group for that, we got our D minor 4-note group, and we got our F, and then our E. So now, here's the thing. Once you learn the actual physical part of playing these things, okay? Now we got to focus on the utility. Remember I told you I'm going to explain or demonstrate why this works, which we've done already. You get why these work over the chords that they're reflecting, right? But what's next is when it comes to application, this is where you really want to be patient with yourself, because I know this is exciting stuff. It's really fun and fulfilling when you're playing over chord changes and you'll hear a way of soloing that maybe you've never heard yourself play before. But what you don't want to do is get overly excited and overzealous to where you think, okay, I got it now. I have mastered this, A minor blues progression. What next? There's no what next right now when it comes to this. What we have to start with first, remember I talked about active listening? We have to now practice active listening together so that we can learn to anticipate the changes, because when we can anticipate the changes, we can plan ahead on what our move is going to be going in. And here's the thing, that little space of being able to plan ahead is very, very important, because that's going to give you, that's going to also give you room to add some creative liberties to it. That's when you can start peppering in pentatonic licks, other ways to just make it really flow and go smoothly, so it's not like you're just highlighting the chords up and down. Because you don't want to get caught in that trap of just going up and down in these 4-note groups, just like you would going up and down an entire scale pattern, right? We're still trying to make music here. So this is why these 4-note groups, it's just a great introduction, great way to get started. Don't worry about like, how do I play this in an upper octave? Don't worry about that right now. What you got to focus on first is learning these patterns and learning how to execute them while active listening. And then once you're able to, like I said, anticipate the changes in a given chord progression, which is what's great about blues, because it's just very repeatable, right? You'll get like 8, 10, or 12 bars of like the same chord progression. So that's a great place to start with blues, because it's a lot easier for it. There's not going to be any crazy surprises usually, right? So you can sit there and focus and listen and then work in those changes. Make sure you're landing the proper chord tones over the proper chord. And then once you're comfortable with that, we can start exploring that little gap of time, right, that we talked about with anticipation. Now that you know what to expect with the chord progressions, and you can start peppering in some creative ideas on making it all flow. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to throw the backing track on, and I'm going to go once through the chord progression, just focusing on highlighting the notes. Essentially what I want you to do right now. And then the second go around of the chord progression, I'm going to start throwing in little liberties just to show you what the next step's going to look like. All right, here we go. Okay, so right there in that first go around, I was strictly focusing on the chord tones, trying to make it fit rhythmically and make it interesting to me playing them instead of just kind of statically playing them up and down. Because you can make just a handful of notes sound interesting if you look at little different, guitar linguistics, like little slides, vibratos, think about your time feel, all that stuff can make that a lot of fun to play, so you don't just feel like you're just going, you don't want to be doing that. That'll get boring pretty quickly. So, and then in the second go around, right, I was throwing in more pentatonic licks. I was pretty much focused on just like this particular box of the A minor pentatonic scale, and it worked great. I was just trying to find spots where it would just work and it would flow, but I was still listening to the chord changes and anticipating when another chord was going to hit, so that I made sure to highlight the chord and then making sure that you could hear kind of the resolution, especially with the turnaround, because there's more changes. It goes to like the F, then the E7, and then it goes to the A minor again, and then back to the E7. So there's a lot of changes happening right there, just at that very last part. But, you know, that's again why it's important to actively listen, so you can anticipate those changes. And because they happen a little quickly, you want to be able to be a step ahead and think quickly on your feet so that you know to play the appropriate notes over the changing chords. So to summarize, you have this 4-note group that highlights the root, the third, the fifth, and the octave, which can be applied to any chord. You just got to make sure that you apply the major or minor third depending on what chord you're highlighting. And you pretty much cover like a whole lot of ground when it comes to major and minor tonality. Like most songs in Western music obviously use these chords frequently, and there are hundreds upon hundreds of songs that are only just major and minor chords. No weird curveballs like diminished or augmented chords or anything like that. But even over like seventh chords, for example, you can use the major 4-note group and it totally works, like we just demonstrated with that blues backing track. And there you go, like it covers a whole lot. So if you're to just take any chord progression and break down the chords, find the root note of each chord. I recommend using either the low E string or the A string to find the root note, okay? Start with the root note, then you know where the minor third is, you know where the major third is as far as the movability of the shape, and then the fifth and the octave, and then you're good to go. You can even think of it like you're changing keys with each chord, at least to start, right? Because once you get comfortable with active listening and making sure that you nail it as far as hitting the right chord tones with the appropriate chord, once you start adding more creative liberties and start using that little gap of time, like I said, where you're anticipating the changes and there's room for some creative movement, that's when you can start playing through the changes and it becomes really smooth and intentional as opposed to just, mechanical and then just kind of, cut and paste as far as like, playing the exact right notes over the exact right chords. Now, if you're at a current point in your guitar playing where you don't yet know how to find any key on your fretboard, much less any chord, right, based on where the root note is, let's say on the low E string or the A string, I actually have just the thing that's going to teach you all of that and then some. And it actually happens to be that free gift I was telling you about. Remember that? Well, here it is. This bad boy right here is a free lesson on how to solo in any key. So imagine taking what we learned today and being able to not only apply it in any key, but learn how to find any note on the fretboard so that way any kind of major or minor chord that you're trying to figure out in a given chord progression is no longer a mystery. Just be sure to click here to claim your copy or check that link in the description box. When you're learning new concepts like this for soloing, it can be super fun and exciting. But trust me when I say this, the best way to progress is just to take where you're at right now and just move forward one step at a time.